This is my Walstad Method Bloody Mary shrimp tank that is basically a pearlweed jungle, and it's currently 3.5 months old, so I wanted to publish a video going over how I set the tank up. I know that some people love this style of tank and other people absolutely hate them, but one thing's undeniable: these are very cheap and very easy to set up, making them great for people new to keeping pet shrimp. This tank uses the Walstad method to keep costs as low as possible, so the substrate is made up of topsoil capped with sand or gravel, using fast grown pearlweed to act as a natural water purifier to keep the shrimp safe. So starting off with the actual tank, and I'm using a 25 litre or 6.6 US gallon diverser aquarium that are cheap and easy to find here in Europe. If you are in the UK, then a 24 litre Aquatown tank from Pets at Home is another great budget friendly option. If you're in North America, then a 5.5 US gallon Aquarium tank from Petco will also work well, and it can be even cheaper if you catch it in the Petco half off sale. Depending on your goals for your shrimp tank, you can use far larger tanks than this one, but your costs will increase as the tank gets larger. Adding a background to the tank is optional, and it does become less effective as the pearlweed grows in, but I chose to add one anyway. You simply spray some water onto the back of the tank and then add some cheap privacy film designed for use on windows that you can pick up on Amazon. Then you use a card to smooth out the privacy film and remove any trapped water that's under it, and then use a scalpel or razor blade to trim the film to size. I'm using some cheap Westland topsoil for this specific build, but most types of topsoil will work well with the Walstad method. I add a layer of topsoil to the bottom of the tank, crushing any large pieces of soil up in my hands while also feeling for any large solid debris such as gravel, rocks and twigs to remove them as required. I apply a small amount of pressure to the top of the soil to slightly compact it and try and remove any trapped air, but this step is optional. As you can see, there's around a 1/2 inch deep layer of topsoil in the tank, but you can go as deep as 1 inch. I'm going to use some cheap Petex Roman gravel to cap the soil, as it's worked really well in my other Walstad tanks, but any cheap gravel or sand will work. The capping layer of gravel is around 1 inch thick, and from my personal testing in my Walstad setups, I think that a ratio of 1 to 2 is the best for these substrate layers. For example, if you have a 1 inch layer of topsoil, you'll add 2 inches of capping layer, with sand or gravel being preferred, so you always double your capping layer, but other people do have different ratios. Now it's time to add the initial water to the tank, so I add some kitchen roll to the corner to reduce the water pressure as I add the water. At this stage you are not filling the aquarium, so you only need a small amount where the water surface rises around 1 inch above the substrate. The purpose of this is to help remove any trapped air from the substrate while also making it easier to plant your plants. Now it's time to add the pearlweed, and don't worry about the advanced label on the tub. In my experience and the experience of a lot of other people, pearlweed is a very beginner friendly plant that is easy to grow in this type of tank. One thing to note is that pearlweed was recently reclassified again, so you may see it for sale as Hemianthus micromoides or under its new name Hemianthus globuratum. Both of these have pearlweed inside, it's just the new classification on the tub. I'm using one of the tissue culture cups, so I remove the plant from the cup, remove the gel layer on the bottom with water, and then break it down into a lot of small sections. Don't worry about accidentally ripping or tearing the stems or roots in this plant, as it's a stem plant and it will easily repropagate and develop new healthy roots once it's added to the substrate. You get a lot of pearlweed in these small cups, and it's easily enough for a tank of this size, so make sure you dispose of any leftover plant responsibly, as it is invasive in many countries. I always find it easier to add the plants to the substrate with a set of cheap aquascape and tweezers, and these are just from a cheap set on Amazon, which make the job so much easier. Adding the pearlweed to the tank took around 20 minutes and it quickly got boring, but I used a strategy of trying to add some pearlweed to every square inch of the substrate. Judging by how the tanks turned out, I do think the one plant per square inch of substrate is the best distribution when you're going for the overgrown jungle style tank like this. I'm going to be using a cheap Ceorolite for the tank, which currently retails at around $20 as it has a high light output for its low price. Most plant nurseries will list Tropica as needing a medium light and medium CO2 levels to grow, but in my experience this is not the case and it will work perfectly fine under this light, and it's how I grew this tank. I highly recommend you move the tank to wherever you'll be keeping it at this stage while it's still light, because then you're going to add more kitchen roll and fill the tank with water and it'll quickly become heavy. It's completely normal for the pearlweed to look rough at this stage, but over the coming days and weeks it will straighten up and start growing towards the light source in the tank. Fast forward 1 week later and this is what the tank is looking like. I did decide to add some Salvinia floating plant to help control nutrients, but I don't think this is essential at all and I ended up removing it. The pearlweed has started to grow towards the light source and I did add an air stone to help with circulation at this stage, but again I really don't think that's essential and I've since removed it. Pearlweed does grow slowly at first because it takes a couple of weeks for bacteria colonies to form in the topsoil layer that will excrete CO2 and help assist with rapid growth. So fast forward to week 2 and algae is starting to form on the tank glass, but the pearlweed is still going strong. I would guess that the plants are currently around 2 inches tall, but they are still growing and everything's going to plan. Fast forward to week 3 and the algae is getting worse, but this is not an issue for the long term look of the tank, and the pearlweed is starting to find its footing and slightly increasing growth rate. Jump forward to week 4 and some of the plantlets had broken away and were floating around in the water column, and the algae was starting to thicken on the tank glass. Some of the pearlweed stems were starting to rapidly increase their growth rate, but the majority of them were still slow, but this is totally normal at this stage. Fast forward to week 5 and the majority of the stems had increased their growth rate, so I'm guessing the beneficial bacteria colonies in the topsoil had established themselves and they were passively increasing the CO2 levels in the water column. The algae was also growing at a faster rate, but as the pearlweed grows and takes over, it will absorb the majority of nutrients from the water and starve the algae in the future. Jump forward to week 6 and I was confident that the pearlweed had grown to a rate where it would easily be able to handle the bioload of 10 to 15 Neocaridina shrimp, as they are a very low bioload species. I decided to remove the algae from the front glass pane of the tank, being sure to leave algae on the back and side glass for the shrimp to graze on. Then I did a large water change to remove as many of the floating particles in the water column as possible, but this is mainly for aesthetic reasons. I refilled the tank with regular tap water and I didn't see the need to temperature match with the tank's current water as there's no shrimp in there yet. I did add some tap water conditioner to the tank to deal with any chlorine and chloramines that might be in there, because beneficial bacteria can be sensitive to them. Next, I added some GH and KH shrimp salt to the tank to help my shrimp molt, as I live in an area with soft tap water. The lack of calcium and magnesium in my tap water can cause problems with my shrimp molting, so they end up crushing themselves from the inside as they grow and can't get out of their old carapace. If you live in an area with hard tap water, then this step probably won't be needed, but it's definitely worth checking if you live in an area with soft water, as it can cause problems with your shrimp. There's no shrimp in the tank yet, so I just added the salt directly to the tank, but usually I do add it to a cup with water to let it dissolve before adding it to the tank. I checked my tank water with my GH-KH test kit to ensure that it had a GH of between 6 and 10 and a KH of between 3 and 10 to make sure the shrimp would easily be able to molt. Unfortunately, I have lost the video footage of me actually adding the shrimp to the tank, but you can see them at the bottom in this clip. I didn't record any more weekly updates either, as the tank was already cycled and had shrimp in it, and this is what the tank looks like today, 3.5 months after its initial setup. As you can see, the pearlweed has taken over, so just ignore the recommendations of the various plant nurseries that recommend moderate light and CO2 for this plant. There's an absolute ton of grazing space in here for the shrimp to feed on algae and biofilm, as the pearlweed just dominates the available space in the aquarium. I decided to add Bloody Mary shrimp to this tank as they are still Neocaridina shrimp, so they are a beginner friendly species, but apparently they come from the brown breeding line rather than the red breeding line like cherry shrimp and have a slightly different appearance. Personally, I prefer their reflective semi-translucent outer carapace, but there's a ton of different colours of Neocaridina shrimp out there, so you'll be able to choose whatever you want. Initially, I added 12 Bloody Mary shrimp to this tank, and around 2 weeks ago I managed to count 9 of them still in there, feeding on an algae wafer that I dropped into the tank. That doesn't mean that the other 3 shrimp have died, as there's plenty of hiding spots in here for them. It just means that I could verify that 9 of them were still alive at that stage. Around a week ago I did add another batch of Bloody Mary shrimp to this tank, as they hadn't started breeding yet, so I think that I might have got a batch that is all female. This is a common problem with Neocaridina shrimp because the females tend to have the majority of the colour when compared to males, so a lot of vendors will just sell the brighter coloured females. I had this exact same problem with my orange Neocaridina colony, but it's a lot easier to confirm with orange Neos, as you can see the ovaries on the females a lot easier when compared to the red Bloody Marys. I think that the algae and biofilm that passively grows in this tank can support the needs of a shrimp colony of this size, but I do still like to target feed the colony 3 times per week. When target feeding, I usually like to add a high protein food such as a single bug bite granule or 1/4 of a microalgae wafer per 10 Neocaridina shrimp in the tank, and it's worked very well with my other colonies. In my experience, it's easier for Neocaridina shrimp to breed when there's a decent amount of protein in their diet, so if you are looking to breed your shrimp, it might be an idea to do something similar. I do like to mix things up in their diet from time to time, so I have tried shrimp snowflake food, bloodworm and a couple of other popular foods, and these guys have eaten all of them without issue. Neocaridina shrimp can survive at room temperature year round, so there's no need to add a heater to this tank yet. It's August at the time of recording, so ambient temperatures will start to drop over the coming months, so I may have to add a heater in the future. Just to clarify, I'm not actually worried about the water temperature affecting the shrimp in this tank, but some plants can have issues if their water temperature gets too cold. Flowgrow suggests that pearlweed has a low water temperature tolerance of 5 degrees Celsius or 41 degrees Fahrenheit, and the water temperature in this tank should never get anywhere even close to that, so hopefully it will be fine. As you can see, there's no salvinia or any other floating plant in this tank now, and I guess I removed it at around month 2. The main reason I removed the salvinia was because I felt it was using up a lot of the nutrients in the water column that the pearlweed would be able to use. Another potential issue with floating plants that I've had in some other tank setups is light penetration, as this is still a relatively low powered light and the salvinia was blocking it as it would carpet the surface of the water, so I just removed all of it. Cycling a Walstad Method tank like this one is still important, but it is an often overlooked step as people presume that the plants will deal with any potential problems with water parameters. To my knowledge, plants will deal with a lot of the ammonium and nitrate, but they prefer to eat those compounds over ammonia and nitrite, so you still need some beneficial bacteria colonies. Thankfully, the bioload of shrimp is low, so most people should easily be able to let the nutrients leaked from the topsoil cycle their tank over 4 to 8 weeks without any other action being taken. If you like, you can pick up something like Dr. Tim's ammonia solution to add a fake bioload to the tank, but when keeping shrimp I really don't think this is essential, and the soil should leak enough ammonia to get the job done. Other than water top-ups, I really haven't done any maintenance until the start of month 3 as the pearlweed was still grown in. Right now I'm trimming a small amount of pearlweed from the tank every weekend, but it's really not as bad as I thought it would be. This is one of the advantages of this type of setup, as I don't need to worry about the pearlweed blocking light for other plants, and I just let the pearlweed grow and take over everything. Usually I don't dose my Walstad Method tanks with liquid fertilizers, as fish waste is often enough to keep the plants grown. However, this is a shrimp tank and shrimp have a far lower bioload than fish. Just to put things in perspective, I fed the betta that I kept in my old Walstad tank between 7 and 14 food granules per day, but this shrimp tank gets 3 granules per week. After seeing some issues with the pearlweed browning pretty early on, I did end up dosing the tank with 3 ml of TNC Complete liquid fertilizer once per week. I'm really not 100% if this was essential to keep the pearlweed grown, but I didn't want to take any chances. Topsoil will help to provide essential micronutrients to the plants, and it also holds beneficial bacteria that will produce CO2 to assist plant growth, but it can be lacking in essential nitrogen compounds. In a Walstad fish tank, this is usually overcome by the fish eating a lot more food than shrimp, and the fish waste providing all the nitrogen compounds the plants require. Shrimp consume far less food, especially a colony of this size, resulting in less nitrogen compounds being released into the water column, so it might be a good idea to look into getting a liquid fertilizer. With any luck, I will have gotten some male shrimp in that last batch, so the colony size will start to increase and I can add more food and eventually stop adding liquid fertilizer to this setup. Anyway guys, that brings the video to an end. Hopefully it was helpful. Thanks for watching and have a good day.